Hey everybody, welcome back to Eggs. This week we have special guest Derick Van Ness. Derick is a wealth strategist who is passionate about helping people reach their full potential. His company, Big Life Financial, is focused on removing the mystery and misfortune around money and financial strategies so people can live their biggest lives. Derick believes that each person has something unique and valuable to contribute to the world, but that most people are never able to express that gift due to fear, doubt, or worry related to money. His mission is to eradicate that fear and fundamentally change the way people think about and utilize money within the next generation. Derick's company can help anyone, but it's specifically focused on small business owners and has already helped thousands of them to create financial certainty and confidence. He is a straight shooter and has an uncanny ability to explain complex concepts in a simple way that allows clients to see massive results. Here to talk about all that and so much more is our guest, Derick Van Ness. Hey, Derick, how are you, man?
I'm great. Great to be here with you guys.
Yeah, glad to have you. Thank you so much for making time to do this.
We really appreciate you giving us your time. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. So to kick this thing off, let's just get into a little bit of your background, who you are, where you come from, and what you do.
Well, I'll give you guys a little different view of me than the typical person, because I know you're both creative guys and like a lot of different sides of things versus just the business side, because that's what I do for a living. But a huge part of who I am is, I'm a creative person. I'm an artist. I do competitive swing dancing and have done partner dancing for many years. Got a dance degree in college to go with my business degree. And they kind of gave me a hard time about that. They said, we can't really consider dance a legitimate minor. And I said, what if I want to own a dance studio? And he was like, all right, I guess I'll sign off on that. So been really passionate about that for a long time. And I bring a lot of that to my business, right? A lot of the keys to what we do for people is finding a way to relate with people. And I think you guys probably get this. You run a podcast. When you experience a lot of things and you find different ways to see the world, you're able to connect with and relate with people differently. And I feel like that's something that being a creative person has really brought to what I do, because quite frankly, a lot of the business and financial guys aren't that, at least not in a traditional sense. So grew up being a kind of a sports guy, but as I got into college, got really into the arts and into philosophy and into religion. I think I'd just always been driven to express myself, and started my own business a couple of years out of college, because after working in a cube for a few years, I realized that felt like being a caged animal, which isn't really my jam. So I had to quit that, and I started flipping houses before flipping houses was a thing. I just like the idea. I grew up in construction of taking something ugly and making it pretty. Like, it was literally that simple. There was no shows about it or anything like that. But I just thought, if I can buy a house, live in it for a couple months, make it really cool, and then sell it, do that 3 times a year and make $100,000 a year, that'd be pretty cool. At 26, 27, that seemed like a really good idea. So I started doing that, but then it turned into a big thing. And that's really when I learned a lot about business. Is I got to where I was doing 3 a month instead of 3 a year. And that's a major operation, because, to buy, fix, and resell a house takes about 4 to 6 months. So if you're doing 3 a month, you're talking about 15 to 30 projects going at any given time. It's a lot to manage. And so I had to get really efficient. And that's where I fell in love with like business and finance and all that, because creative ways to motivate my team and to leverage money and to build relationships, all while managing all these projects, just became something I was really fascinated by. Spent a ton of money learning about business and finance, probably $150,000 in that era, just going to seminars and trainings and high-end, learning from the best of the best. And so that was a really fun period of life. And then 2008 hit and kind of knocked me on my butt, right? Yeah. I'm sure you guys have never heard that before.
Right.
Nope. It seems to be a common thread in most real estate conversations that we have.
Yeah. Basically for like 2 to 3 years, like real estate as we knew it didn't exist, right? Like, I don't know until we just had this pandemic if that's ever happened, where it was just like, oh yeah, there's this industry that's thriving, and now nobody's lending. Banks just stopped, but they didn't tell anyone. So at that point, a good friend of mine took me and brought me to the financial side. He's like, hey, you've got all the financial training. You're an entrepreneur. we work with business owners and you've got the skill set and the understanding of what it's like to be a business owner. I really want you to come and teach these people about money. And so we started working with a lot of people who are good at what they do, like a lot of artists, right? But we also worked with a lot of medical people, great at what they did, just didn't know anything about money and finances. So they're kind of on what I call the financial treadmill. Like money comes in the front and out the back, and in the front and out the back. And they're just running as fast as they can and not getting anywhere. And that becomes really tiresome after a while. So, so that kind of got me on the trail of like really loving to work with business owners and helping them demystify money. Because I think, and you guys would probably agree with this, like the reason my business is called Big Life Financial is I feel like money's the reason most people don't do what they want to do with their life. So if we can help people get that out of the way, then you can like live the life you're here to live. And I think everybody has something to give the world. And so I'm here to help create systems for them, simple systems instead of all that complicated stuff we've been led to believe is the way. How do you create some simple systems to get money out of the way so you can live the life you're here to live?
Yeah, I was actually reading your blog, and you had recently written an article about success hacking. Man, I can't even talk today. Essentially using systems to scale your business in life. Can you maybe break those systems down for us or kind of give us an overview of what you mean by success hacking?
Sure. So a couple of things there, like I write a lot of articles, so I'm not sure which one you read, but, but really the philosophy is anything that you're going to do repetitively, if you can find a way to reverse engineer what's the ideal process for getting the outcome that we want, right? And then build that into your business, schedule when it's going to get done, how it's supposed to get done, and make sure that whoever's supposed to carry that out knows that's their job, whether that's you or someone else. And by systematizing it, what it does, it lets your brain rest so you can focus on the creative work, right? Like I'm currently building a Facebook group, and we are building a lot of leverage and a lot of momentum there. And it's like for me to figure out every day, what am I going to post? What should I do? Like as a brand new thing is a lot of work. But now I've got it down to on Monday, I do this. On Tuesday, I do this. On Wednesday, I do this. On Thursday, I do this. So my brain doesn't have to keep figuring it out. There's a system in place. So I'm able to be much more productive. I'm able to engage the creative brain while still creating that consistency, which I think is one of the things that a lot of people miss. You got to have consistency to get long-term results.
Yeah, I can imagine that with your home flipping in the early days, you had to develop systems like that to be able to do so many homes in such a short period of time. I assume that most homes and rehabs probably have similar problems and similar things you have to overcome. So by developing a system that kind of check this, do that, do this, and then it kind of does it most of the work for you to an extent. So it's very insightful on your end to frame it in that way as a system.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sitting here thinking, as a creative person myself, that the prospect of developing all these systems isn't exactly second nature for myself or many creatives that I know. And, I imagine, to Mike's point about having these different processes and things like that for house flipping, I suppose in your business, you come across these kinds of things also as you're dealing with a lot of artists, for example. I suppose there's probably some commonality between them in terms of, even though they all think they're really artistic and different, there's probably some core things that are kind of the fundamental problems that you go in and fix. So I think it's really interesting how you balance sort of your creative side, being a artist yourself, and then also being into, things like dance and things like this that are really sort of, creative brain stuff. Yet at the same time, you've pulled together finance and even home flipping and mechanical things like that, because it seems like you're actually flexing both sides of your brain. So can you talk a little bit about that process, or how you were able to sort of combine those two things and sort of overcome maybe some of your problems you may have had to overcome as an artist in order to facilitate this financial training?
Yeah. So I truly believe I'm a creative person, and that I was trained to be detail oriented and systems oriented by my father. So it was like I was born one way and trained another way. So I kind of ended up with both. How that has manifested in the artistic world or other things is a lot of times with artists, we want to be creative, but I find that it's really, really useful to have a framework within which to be creative. Like with art, like I love method-based art where it's like, okay, I'm going to go into this and here's a process that's a system, so to speak, a way to approach art that consistently creates a result that I like. And what that does is it allows me to focus within the structure. Like there's a quote that's out there, and I'm going to probably butcher it here, but the idea is only when the structure is in place can true creativity flourish, right? And so that takes place in dance. With partner dancing, we have a set of rules about how leading and following works. Because we've agreed upon that set of rules, we can do so many things creatively because we all know like what the givens are, right? What's the framework within that we're both agreed upon. And so I find that for artists, a lot of times if you can create frameworks in how you approach your art, it allows you to create a body of work with a level of consistency or a feel or a style. Because I think that's a big thing with artists is you need to create a style that's recognizable, right? If you don't have a recognizable style, you're just this person who did this one cool picture but never did anything like it. Again, people who become famous, and there's a part of me that sort of hates and resists this because I like to try new things, but truly the people who become really well known, they've created a body of work that's recognizable. You look at something and you say that's a so-and-so, right? And so how do we find creativity within that, right? We have certain guidelines that we use that create that consistency, that common vein within our sound or our look or whatever. And then we can be really creative and flexible around that, but we kind of have that common root. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Completely.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great because I mean, it's funny, so many artists think of themselves as individual and they really are, but you're right. I mean, what you're alluding to basically is branding, right? I mean, if you're going to be seen on the streets and recognized as a Banksy, for example, well, then you must look like Banksy. If he's out doing, still lifes all of a sudden, or, becomes a swing dancer, we may not recognize Banksy.
That is absolutely true. And it's tricky, I kind of came up with this idea and some people love it and some people hate it. I call it the Eminem method, the rapper Eminem, not the candy. Because what I noticed he was doing is he would create an album and he would have 1 to 2 pop songs on there. And then he would have 10 songs that were what he wanted. And so he took a small portion of himself, instead of having a side gig as a waiter, he was like, let me give the people what they want. That's still in integrity with who I am for 2 songs and make my money that way. And then the other 80% of it, I can do what I want with. And I find with a lot of artists I worked with when I lived in New York City, what we did was we found something that that was true to them, but that sold. And we would have them spend a certain portion of time sort of recreating within that vein. And then over here, they could do all the other experimental stuff. So that stuff that sold became like their baseline, their income they could count on. And that allowed a lot of freedom with the rest of their work. Because I think the hardest thing as an artist, at least what I found, was not letting the idea that someone has to buy this screw up what I want to do creatively. Right? Like you have a tendency to pander to the people if you need to make money. And the problem with pandering to the people is you're not really truly expressing you. You're guessing at what you think they might want to pay for. And that just like takes all the power out of it, in my opinion. So I found that if you can find something that pays well, that's still in integrity with you, that creates the freedom to do what you want elsewhere.
Well, and it's true all the way to the most famous or the biggest names. You look at the Picassos and stuff, and he's known for the janky faces and things like that. But if you go to like I think it's at the Met in New York, they've got pictures of sort of old Greek figures and things like this that he's done that you wouldn't think of as a Picasso, but it was still him, but that was probably the stuff that, he was doing on the side while he was doing crazy faces for people who were buying stuff. And so it's, it's really interesting that you put it that way. It's, cause it's funny, again, we think of as artists of being so aloof and so out there, but even if they're consciously doing it, they're developing these systems.
Yeah, I think that the people who, I don't know if it's that they naturally do it or they have a good business person that helps them do it. I think a lot of it is your own mindset, right? Like as artists, we do have a tendency to think I'm unique, I'm original, I want to be totally different than everybody. And because of that, we have a tendency to not want to sell out. And even if something that we do becomes successful, we feel like we have to totally reinvent ourselves. And I feel like as long as you're being true to yourself, if that continues to be who you are and the type of art that you want to create and explore, because I found for me within art, it's definitely that. You do one thing and it gives you an idea or leads to the next thing, which leads to the next thing, right? And you kind of explore an area of creativity or expertise or an idea or a motif or whatever it is before you move on to the next thing. I think not pushing yourself to have to always be different, but giving yourself permission to stay where you want to stay until you don't want to stay there anymore, right? And not making it wrong if people like what you do. That's okay. Like we all think that's what we want, but I think people start to feel like, am I selling out? What's going on? And I think that's an honest question, but I don't think we should let that be the driver.
Yeah, well, and I think so often, it's we're caught up in the voices in our own head. We're sitting and having these conversations with ourselves, but they have very little to do with reality. This assumption that everyone knows who you are and what they're doing is probably not realistic. And so, so we have these discussions and we talk ourselves into or out of doing things when the reality is, nobody will notice. Like it's just going to be us. So I think you're right that it makes the most sense to just sort of be true to you. Because ultimately, that's the only way you're going to find any kind of happiness. Because the rest of the time, you'll be telling yourself that everyone thinks you're crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you can take feedback from other people, but absolutely, Ryan, like the number one thing is it's got to be you. Like that's where your power comes from, right? When you're imitating someone else, when you're trying to be something that you aren't, when you're pandering is my word to other people's needs, you lose all of that power, like whatever's in the core of you. But I also think you can listen to other people and say, okay, like, this is what you like about what I do. This is where it doesn't work for you. I can think about that and maybe that can inspire me of how to reach deeper into you or deeper into myself. Because I definitely have found getting some feedback from people made a huge difference for me in some of the art that I did, where they were like, I love this idea, but like, it's too disconnected for me. I need a little more of this or a little more of that. And I started thinking about that and I didn't like take their idea, but it inspired me to create art that was more cohesive, and all of that started to sell like crazy, just because of that feedback I got from someone.
Yeah, it's crazy how just one little suggestion can change everything for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's kind of swing back more toward the financial side of things. For example, one of the talking points on your one sheet here is how to create a financial peace of mind in the next 3 years. How would you say go into a small business and maybe put together a system for that small business to have that financial peace of mind in 3 years? Can you kind of give us a breakdown of what you would do if you took on a new client and you're kind of assessing their situation?
Well, and just to add on to that real quick too, I mean, it does sort of, I guess it's a logical next step. After we've done all this discovery, we found out who we are and we're doing things that are true to us. Now, how are we allowed to do that? And that's, I guess, by building these frameworks that Mike's asking about.
Yeah. So the first framework, and this is something I've coached on for a long time, but it's not what I do as my primary thing right now. Is it goes without saying that you have to become excellent at your craft, right? You have to invest in the skill set, the mentors, the practice, the whatever it takes to develop a skill set that's valuable to people, right? Because if your business isn't creating money, like all the other stuff doesn't matter, right? So I feel like the number one thing is people realizing that your wealth is going to be created inside of your business, not some outside product. Like if you don't get the business right, you don't even have money to invest. Like you're not even in the game. So you got to get your business to where it's producing first. Until you have a predictable income or something that's consistent, it's very difficult to create a long-term strategy, right? So I would say that's the very first thing that I would look at as a business is, are you profitable? If you're not, we have to make a better product, make a better service, create better marketing, whatever your bottleneck is there, we got to clear that out.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to set a budget for yourself when one month you make $1,000 and the next month you make $5,000, and so it's kind of hard to I'm going to set aside this much each time when it's it's flexible. It changes each month from month to month, especially as a small business or an artist. The starving artist goes that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually run into that a lot with, I kind of advise for a couple of nonprofits, and nonprofits are the worst. They do these events and they get a big chunk of money, and then they like have no cash flow until the next one comes. So they're kind of in this, do we dare to spend it? Do we dare to spend it? They can never create a long-term vision. And so what I've been urging a lot of them to do, and this might be something that I've seen artists do stuff like this, but how do you create monthly cash flow or weekly cash flow or whatever? But let's go with monthly. Rather than asking for a donation at a dinner event that's like a one-time $50, $100, $500, $1,000 type of donation, how about if people give $20 a month, right? And you could just get a bunch of people to give $20 a month instead of $100 one time. Now you know that for the next 12 months or ongoingly until they cancel, we've got money coming into our business. Now we can make a long-term plan, right? We can invest in things and build over time. It's just so difficult to do that if you don't have cash flow, right? And so I think the same thing for artists. And this is where I've seen like Patreon be a really great fit for a lot of artists, because it's really set up to get people to give money. And then you can offer rewards, especially as an artist. You can do gifts and specialty things and stuff that really helps people feel connected to you. And so that can create cash flow versus selling a piece of art. Like I sponsor a guy through Patreon. I think I pay like $10 a month, and he creates graphic novels. And then at the $10 level, like once a quarter, he sends me like a signed picture of one of the pages from the graphic novel, right? It's not an original, but it's like almost like a cliche, but sort of, like a high quality print that he signed. And he sends that to me like once a quarter or something. And he gets a certain amount of money either every month or every time he finishes a chapter or something. But he's created cash flow for himself. As he does the work, he continues to get paid, and then he rewards us in a way that works for him. Maybe it costs him $3 to mail it out to me. And, over that period of time, he's gotten 40 or $50 for me. And he's creating a fan, and he's keeping me engaged with his art. And it's just like a different way to engage with people. But I thought, as a contributor, it's really cool. It keeps me connected to him and his art. And for him, it allows him to ongoingly continue to do the things that he wants to do and get paid for his progress. So I think cash flow is a really big deal for businesses. Without it, it's really, really hard to build for the long haul. And it really does take a long-term vision to get there.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, we had a guest on kind of early on in the show. His name is Anderson Blue, but he does sneaker prints where he'll do like LeBron James in his shoe, and he's like doing a crazy dunk or something. And he does batch quantities. He does like, I'm going to release 100 copies of this piece of work. And he usually has them pre-sold before he even finishes the piece. So he's promoting it the whole time he's drawing it. When he releases it, he usually has them all sold before he even ships them off. And that's he knows it's X amount of dollars, X times this equals what I'm making. And then he just works on the next print when he needs his next cash flow injection. So,
well, and for someone like that, like if we're just talking purely in terms of cash flow, right? He can do it any way he wants. But you might say, you know what? Instead of selling those shoes for $150, how about if you sell them for 10 payments of $15 a month, right? So now you don't just blow all the money the day you get paid, and then you're trying to stretch it out, because that puts you into a state of scarcity. I have a finite amount of resources before I have to go and do my next thing. But if you get 100 people who do it, now I've got $1,500 a month for the next 10 months. It's a different mindset, right? Like it creates confidence, it creates clarity, it creates certainty. You're not always in that urgent, like, do I dare to spend this dollar? Because every time I spend a dollar, I have a dollar less, which is totally like a shrinking mentality. If we want to be business owners, if we want to be artists, we have to have like that exponential, that creation mentality. And it's difficult to do that when you're in survival. So I think even though that may not be the best for his shoe model, like if I was trying to create cash flow for someone, I may say, let's take half of your launches or whatever, and let's put them on payment plans, just because maybe you'll get a shot from half of them. And then the other half, you've got ongoing cash flow, so you don't just go immediately into constriction.
Yeah, it almost kind of makes me think of the passive income, like with real estate or like with, I don't know, like a software as a system and having a subscription, that
Sure.
is almost kind of the method you're going after there. Can you, with everything that's going on with COVID right now, the stock market and all these different, what's a good way to kind of invest as a small business owner into something that's recession proof or this, is real estate the way to go? Because I'm almost like thinking right now that if I own a bunch of rentals, I'm not seeing checks coming in right now with COVID going on. It almost seems like that's not the way to go, when really that's what I've been taught my whole life is real estate. That's what you want to invest in.
Sure.
What's a good option these days?
Well, so the first thing, without sounding like some kind of Wall Street guy, is like what we're going through. They call it a black swan, right? It's like an unpredictable event that nobody could have seen coming, like a meteor hits the planet, or in this case, a pandemic. We've never seen the world economy shut down before, right? Yeah. So it's impossible to sort of predict. And the reality is, with the government involved and them being able to just change the rules at the drop of a hat, like, oh, you just can't evict people. Oh, banks, you just can't collect on mortgages. Like, it's very difficult to forecast that. And I'm not saying governments shouldn't do certain things like that to really like stabilize our world. But as a business owner, it is difficult to plan for those kind of things. And that's where I'm not a huge fan of like over diversification, right? Like people say, oh, diversify, put all your money all over the place. I really believe that you should have your eggs in a couple of baskets, but not too many, right? So the way that we teach people to do that is, I think your business is one basket, right? Because you have the most ability to impact and control that. You can pivot on a dime. You understand your economy, your market. You understand all those kinds of things. That's your first thing. The second thing is, we teach people to, of course, you got to have some cash savings, right? You want to have an emergency account for these types of situations. Because if you don't have cash savings, you're always living on the edge. You make bad decisions. You're always making short-term decisions, which generally speaking is not a good idea. Like if you try and plan a vacation, COVID aside, if you try and plan a vacation for next week, you're just going to get screwed on everything, right? And that's kind of how life works. The further your planning horizon is, the further you look into the future when you make plans, the better your ability to make good decisions and really accomplish big things, right? If you plan a vacation a year in advance, you can get the best flights and all the best tours, and you can shop deals, and you can do research and all this other stuff. So building your business and your finances is the same thing. Like having a bigger, longer term vision makes a really big difference. So, but saving cash is your second skill, because if you don't start taking some chips off the board every time you get paid, you just never build up any money. You can't go and invest and get real estate or other things. I know you can do no money down real estate deals. I've done dozens of them, and you can do a lot of other things, but those are definitely the exception, not the rule. Usually if you've got cash, you can do a lot of things. And then we teach people to put money, especially business owners, put money into something we call our cash flow banking system, which is there's a special type of account that has guarantees. And right now the guarantee is 4% on your money plus an upside with the dividend. It's not tied to the market. It's not tied to any of that stuff. It's contractually guaranteed and backed by some of the biggest and safest financial institutions in the world. It's literally where banks store their money. And so while everybody else is doing all this up and down, you can just focus on being great with your business and storing your cash in a place where it always goes up. And that allows you ultimately, I mean, the storage vehicle is great. It does nice things for you. It grows your money. You're going to do well. You're going to save on taxes. But where it really pays off is you don't have all the distraction. You don't have all the noise. You can focus on your business. Because once again, when we look at statistically where people build wealth, it's in their business. That's where all your skill set is. That's where all your relationships, all your experiences, all your training. I think we've been led to believe that we're supposed to take, okay, so here's how I like to put it. If someone came to you and said, okay, take as much money as you can from this place you know about, you care about, you control, you have all your training, all your experience, and you're watching it every single day. Take as much as you can away from that. hand it over to a guy that you don't know to invest in something you don't understand or have control of. And that's how you're going to get wealthy.
Yeah.
I believe that.
That's hilarious. That's true.
Yeah. And that's what we're being told to do.
Well, for me, in my personal example right now, I'm a DJ. I have a lot of investments in equipment and the gear that I need for that equipment. And to me, that at the time, that seemed like a great asset, a great, storage for my money. And I always have to keep investing in new equipment. But right now it's all sitting in a warehouse somewhere and it can't be used and it's not making me any money. Right. And obviously this is it's not a normal thing. COVID isn't normal, but am I making the mistake of investing in the wrong equipment? I mean, could I be using that money in a better way and renting gear and getting a better return on my money and have someone else maintain it and someone else upkeep it and not deal with that?
Yeah. So the short answer is it depends, right? How much does it cost versus how much is a rental? And not just the cost of like buying the equipment, but insuring it, maintaining it, updating it. Like you'd probably have to do some sort of cost benefit analysis and say, what are my real costs? How much would it cost me if I did rentals per year versus buying my own equipment? I mean, I think there's some value in having your own equipment and being able to customize it and get it set up exactly the way that you want. But I think that's a realistic conversation. But the reality is like, that's probably like every business needs equipment, right? We all need computers and phones and tables and chairs and whatever, even if you work from home. And if you've got a big business, you've got auto shop lifts or you've got servers for software development or whatever. Like, I don't know that there's a way to really get around it. So I don't think that's ever a bad investment, like in your business, if it's going to make you more money.
So how would you define the difference between good debt and bad debt? Like if I'm taking on a loan to buy this equipment, is that considered good debt?
You sound like you've been looking at my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the difference where I draw the line in good debt or bad debt is, here's the simplest version of it. Good debt is debt that you take on that's going to make you more than it costs you. If your debt, if you're using debt for consumption just to buy stuff, that's a terrible idea. You should buy stuff cash or have the cash to be able to pay it off when you buy it, right? Like sometimes it makes sense to put something pay for a computer $30 a month instead of $2,500, as long as you've got the cash for it. And a computer will make you a lot more than it will cost you. But where I see people making mistakes is they're paying for stuff they can't afford. And it's not stuff that's going to build their business or build their income. So I don't mind you going into debt for equipment that's going to earn you a lot more than it costs you. I don't mind you going into debt for an education that's going to teach you new skills that will allow you to make more money. But if you just want to buy a bunch of cool clothes just to look cool and you're not going to make money from those, I think that's a bad use of debt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. So like if I'm, starting a lawn company, a lawnmower is a good investment. But if I just buy the nice lawnmower to, do my own lawn on Saturdays, not really the best investment.
You shouldn't go into debt for that. You can still buy it because I'm all for buying nice stuff, buying cool stuff. Just don't go into debt for it. You want to say, okay, how do I increase my earnings so I can get the cool stuff? Use that as your motivator instead of just going into debt and trying to figure it out later. That makes sense?
Yeah, makes complete sense.
So Mike started getting into this idea of sort of this 3-year plan before. He sort of brought up this idea. And I think we sort of have touched on a few elements of that. But maybe here in these last 20 minutes, could we take a little bit of time and really explore what that looks like? So for example, and I mean, we'll try and keep this as general as possible so that it's as applicable as possible. But, I mean, if, small business comes to you, their cash flow is shaky, they're, trying to improve their situation, but maybe they didn't realize how bad it was until it was too late. Now they're kind of trying to get things fixed and on the straight and narrow, but they're, but we're not young kids right out of college. They've got a family, they've got a life, they've got all these things. And they have a business that, seems to be working, but, maybe needs a little bit of a good foundation. How could a person like this, just basically an imperfect business person, how could they sort of course correct their life and begin becoming a little bit more financially sound, through these tools and things we have discussed, but also, just in terms of practice?
Yeah. So the first thing would definitely be what we talked about before, right? They got to get the business stabilized. So you got to figure out, why is it not profitable? Where are you making money? Where are you losing money? Do more what makes money, do less of what doesn't, right? Like, that sounds really simple, but sometimes, you need to be aware of that. And a lot of business owners just aren't. So you got to stabilize the cash flow of the business. You have to create savings as a habit, because savings as a habit is going to ensure that you get richer every single month, every single year, right? Once we create savings as a habit, we can start putting some of that money to work. We use, like I said, our cash flow banking system to make sure the money's always going up. And then the other big thing that we see that a ton of businesses miss out on is, once you start making some decent money, is tax efficiency. I know it sounds ridiculous, but on average, per $100,000 of income that we look at, business owners are paying about $11,000 too much in taxes. So if you're making 200 grand, you're paying $22,000 a year in extra taxes. And on top of that, anybody who's in a science-based field, we help companies file for research and development credits. So if they're a SaaS company, or if they're anything medical, anything construction, anything manufacturing, where they develop or create new process systems, that kind of stuff, like, there's a lot of credits out there. And in the last 5 years, it's gotten to the point where there's software that has enabled it so that firms can do this for the little guy, right? Most regular CPAs don't do it. They're specialty firms, but we represent a couple of them. And a lot of my people can get an extra 10, 15, 20,000. I'm talking about small businesses. I work with a lot of real estate investors, but also chiropractors, dentists. I work with a lot of auto shops. But the chiropractors and dentists, they're getting between $10,000 and $30,000 back over 3 years. The dentists, it's more like 40 to 70 over 3 years that they're getting back. So you start adding that together with 10 grand out of every 100 grand you're making, and all of a sudden you're adding 20, 30% to your bottom line, right? So you got a lot more money to build the business faster, or to save, or to put away into growth vehicles. So once you do that, like, once you have a system that creates money, you've got a good saving system, and you're putting it in a place where it always goes up, then you're just on your course, right? And it doesn't take too long to just rinse and repeat and get that thing humming, because now you've got certainty with some of those guarantees and with the system that saves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
So that's the really simple version.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of different moving parts involved with that. Say, for example, you've done your own taxes for the last few years, and you haven't really taken that into consideration. Can you have someone like yourself go back and audit your returns and see if you can save money and get some of that back?
Absolutely. So I'm not a CPA, but I have a couple of accountants that I work with. Some of them are industry specific, and some of them are, just good accounting people. There's a lot of little things, and truly, like, if somebody's only paying $3,000 or $4,000 a year in taxes, it's probably not worth it, because you're not going to find a lot, right? But I'd say if you're paying more than 10 grand a year, there's probably some savings there, and learning how to be efficient about that right now is really important, because as your income increases, so do those numbers, right? And there's a lot more you can do proactively with taxes than reactively. Like, we can look back 3 years and you can refile those returns, so you can get some of that money back, which is like a nice win. But also, moving forward, if you do it properly, there's ways to utilize your primary residence as a write-off beyond like interest and all that kind of stuff. There's something called the Augusta rule. There's a proper way, if it makes sense, to be able to pay your children and get money that you can use to put away for their education, or even for their day-to-day expenses of schooling and computers and all that other kind of stuff. There's ways to pay yourself properly, but you have to do all this stuff before December 31st, right? Like, you can't go back and say, oh, let me pay my kids for 2 years ago. Like, it doesn't work. So, and a lot of that stuff comes down to documentation. And that's where having a good tax planner makes a really big difference is they can say, hey, here's how we set it up so that if you ever get audited, it's bulletproof. We don't tell people to go into the gray area. It's like, hey, these are things you're already doing with your life. Let's incorporate those with your business in a way that makes those write-offs. And a lot of people do some of that, but there's a lot more that most people can be doing that they're not. There's ways to do accelerated depreciation if you have a big commercial building that can be a really big windfall for people depending. So yeah, there's a lot of neat strategies out there. And then once you make really good money, like people who make 500,000 plus, there are some insane strategies of how those guys, instead of paying 50% in taxes, they can be paying the same as guys who make $75,000 in taxes.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm on your website. It's biglifefinancial.com, and you have a tab for a free book, and the book is called What the Rockefellers Do. Yeah. And I'm actually I'm currently listening to Titan.
Okay.
His autobiography, and it's amazing to me how much of a penny pincher he was, and some of the principles that he applied to scaling his business. What's your book about? And is it? I'm assuming it's about the infinite banking system. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how people can get it?
Yeah. So there's actually two easy ways to get it. They can go to the website and get it, or they can just send a text. They can just text the words "Big Life," all one word, to 38470. That's 38470. I say that because a lot of people listen to podcasts on their phone. Sure. So it's just easier to text. But yeah, the book is really about how the Rockefellers used the infinite banking system. It wasn't called that then. It was just essentially creating your own family bank. Infinite banking is just like a cool, snazzy rebrand, of the whole thing. But yeah, the book really talks about how to use your money to systematically save, like I talked about, how to consistently grow it, get tax advantages. And the main thing is, as you're building that money up, it's available to you as a business owner. And we teach people how to use that money that they're building up to grow their business and then pay themselves back instead of paying the bank back. And what that does is it creates an unbroken compound interest curve on their money. So basically, once you put $1 into the system, it never stops working for you the rest of your life. And it's how the Rockefellers have used this. And then this is something that you can parlay into legacy, which is what the Rockefellers have done really well, where you can use this to create banks for your kids so that they never have to go to a regular bank and they don't have to pay interest on all that. Or if they do, they're paying it back into an account with their name on it that will grow for them. So it's just really, it's a really simple system of how to keep your money working for you all the time. I'm starting to call it the dollar maximization model, because really what it does is it takes $1 and it keeps it working for you in a tax efficient way for the rest of your life. And I don't know of any other system that does that. So we're big fans of it. We think it's just a totally awesome foundational system for any business owner.
Is this investing in life insurance for the most part the same? I've heard it a few different ways where you set up a specialized life insurance account and you invest in that.
Yeah, we use life insurance because life insurance has the guarantees, and it also has the tax advantages. And so, the big knock on life insurance is that there's fees up front, and it can be really expensive. And if you set it up improperly, they can be pretty heavy duty. But the fees on life insurance, if you compare them to something like the stock market, at about year 10, they're at a break even. It's just in life insurance, you pay them all in year 1 and 2. Whereas with the stock market, you pay them over time. Over a 20 and 30 and 40 year period, actually, the fees on life insurance are significantly lower than stock market portfolios typically. So it's weird. It gets a bad name because of the fees up front, but we structure it to minimize fees, maximize the cash growth, and maximize the tax benefits. And when you do all that, it's kind of like real estate. If someone used or thought the only way to do real estate was to go to a realtor, pay full blast for a brand new perfect house, like they're paying max for everything. And that's how most agents sell life insurance. What we do is kind of the creative real estate version of insurance, using owner financing, using special terms, setting everything up so that it works and it all fits together. And I've done a ton of creative real estate deals, so I can tell you that the two are very similar in the sense of like, how do we stack everything in our favor so that we're getting the most out of our money. And I just love it because it's a place where you can grow your money and have access to it at the same time. Usually as a business owner, you have to choose one or the other.
So, stats are getting out right now that 60% of the people in the U.S. don't even have $400 in their savings account.
I saw that.
I don't even know if that's an accurate number. I just threw that out there. But what I'm getting at is if you only have $400 in your savings account, is that enough to start one of these, or you need to have 10 grand to be able to kind of put a nest egg in and get it going?
Yeah. So the good news is you don't have to make a ton of money to get started. I would say being able to save $300 a month is probably a starting point. So quite frankly, a guy who doesn't have $400, he needs to invest in his skill set so he can make more money. He needs to reevaluate his spending, because that tells me that whether he makes a lot or he makes a little, he's spending every dollar he's making, right? So he needs to make sure his income's enough to live on, and then he needs to learn how to save first. And then once he gets 3 to 6 months worth of savings, so he's learned how to save, then we can start saving that into a better place, like a life insurance policy or some other vehicle. And that would be the next step. So I would never take someone who has a ton of bad debt. Like if you got a bunch of credit card debt, you shouldn't be doing this system. We should figure out a plan so you can knock out the debt first, because put money into life insurance, but paying 27% on credit cards is silly. Yeah. And I see a ton of people doing it with 401k. They're putting $500 a month in a 401k and they've got 20 grand in credit card debt. And I'm like, hey, how about if you just stop that, pay off your credit cards? That's a guaranteed 27% or 19% rate of return every time you pay down that credit card. That's not money you'll get, but it's money you don't have to pay. So the net effect on your bank account's the same. So there's an order you do these things in, right? So you got to save first, and you got to have some basic insurances, homeowners insurance, auto insurance, health insurance. That sounds elementary, but the problem is people go out and they build a bunch of net worth. They don't have a homeowners insurance or something, and their house burns down, or they get sick and they lose everything. Like I broke a femur snowboarding back in 2006. It was $187,000.
Oh my goodness.
If I didn't have insurance, health insurance, like I hate paying for health insurance, but it's protection against not losing everything, right? So you got to have that. You got to have savings, got to pay off your bad debts. Then you can do something like this system. So for a guy who doesn't have $400, I would say, learn how to save first. Let's reevaluate your expenses. Let's make sure you're earning enough. And if you're not, let's invest in your skill set so you earn more. Then we'll learn how to save. Then we'll learn how to grow your money. That's the order you want to do it in.
That's great. With this type of system, is there asset protection built in? If for example, you have $100,000 built in that account and you don't have health insurance and break your femur, can they come and take it out of that account, or is it protected?
So every state has some level of protection. It varies quite widely from, like, I think in California, it's like $20,000 worth of protection on your cash value. Whereas somewhere like Arizona, or I believe Maryland, don't quote me on this, you'd want to look it up, but they have like 100% protection and everything in between. So yes, it has some asset protection, but it varies quite widely from state to state. I wouldn't encourage someone to get into it just for that reason, because I'd be asking the question of, why are you worried about asset protection? Maybe you need an attorney, right? But yeah, that's one of those benefits. I don't push it too hard, but it can be a huge asset. I honestly, back in 2008, I had to file a bankruptcy. If I'd had a bunch of cash set aside in a life insurance policy, it would have been really nice to not have to give some of that up. I didn't at the time, but to my own demise.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of getting to that time. Any parting shots you want to leave with our listeners, and where can people find you, and what's the best way to reach out? Yeah.
I think the best places to find me, of course, the website, biglifefinancial.com. I have a YouTube channel. If you just Google Derick Van Ness, it'll pop up. There's not too many of us out there. And then I'm also building a Facebook group called the Business Owner Success Lab, where I do free training every single week on Fridays. A lot of people have been getting a lot of value from that. So love to invite people to check that out and just continue to learn. A lot of this is just being engaged in the conversation, especially with what we have going on right now with the pandemic and everything. Like, things change week to week. And so continuing to stay in the right mindset, continuing to get varying opinions and really have conversations around this stuff is important, because whatever we think is going to happen is almost surely what's not going to happen. So we really need to stay flexible and nimble and keep our wits about us, not panic, stick with our own brain. And we have to think for ourselves, because there's a ton of information out there right now. And I think people who move too fast or get too crazy, like, the Warren Buffett quote, right? When everybody's greedy, be fearful. And when everybody's fearful, be greedy. What's funny is everyone thinks that everybody's fearful, but everybody's actually being greedy right now, right? Because everybody's like, oh, should I jump in the market? Should I do this? Should I do that? That is not the time to get deals, because everybody's looking for deals, right? So we want to be aware and really think these things through. I think we oversimplify things in the media, and most things are pretty nuanced. The difference between people who make really good financial decisions and people who don't is the difference between someone who looks at the details versus someone who just kind of looks at the surface. And I think that's a big problem that a lot of people are running into. They just want to look at the surface, and they're going so fast that they make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, I referenced this earlier in another podcast that we did, but that book, Titan, Rockefeller's book, they manufacture their own oil barrels, and they use 40 beads of solder to seal the top. And he sat back and he's like, hey, what if we use 38? And they used 38, and then a certain percentage of them were leaking, and they went up and changed it to 39, and it solved the problem. They were able to still seal all the barrels and contain the oil without the leaks, but they're one bead less in their solder, and that one bead over time accumulated to millions of dollars over the span of Standard Oil, which is incredible to think of, that he's so minute on his accounting to be able to figure out the savings on one bead of solder on his barrels. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me. So I wanted to bring that back up again because I'm still in awe about it.
But yeah, I think it's a good point, just about being measured and taking your time and analyzing these things, because it wouldn't be obvious to most people, especially if to the point earlier that people are skimming the surface or not looking deep, and not being granular about the research they're doing. In the case of Rockefeller, if he hadn't been being granular, he'd have missed that altogether, and that's a missed opportunity. So,
well, another thing too, his wife was just as frugal as he was, and there was a point in time when his kids were growing up, and he wanted to buy all three of his kids bikes, and his wife wouldn't let him, and said, "Hey, we're only getting one, and they can share it." And he's one of the richest people in the world, and his wife wouldn't let him buy bikes for his kids. It's just, it's crazy to me. But
yeah. Well, and I sometimes feel like that sends the wrong message, because I think that the whole point of having money is to increase your quality of life. Like, right. To me, like, more money, but a lower quality of life is a bad trade. I'll just take the better quality of life. Right. So I think there's a difference between being smart with your money and being miserly.
Yeah.
And there's a time and a place, but there's books like The Millionaire Next Door, and they're like, buy a used car and never wear nice shoes and all that. But like, if you love nice shoes and nice cars, maybe that's where you spend your money. And then you're smart elsewhere. I think there's definitely a balance there. You can't, like, one of my friends, Garrett Gunderson, if you guys know him, he always says you can't shrink your way to greatness. And so many people take that approach of just cut back. But once again, it puts you into scarcity. We need to expand our way to greatness. We need to expand our means. We need to create a life that we love and get paid for the things that we love to do and want to do with our life. That's truly living the abundant life, right? And that's what we really want. I think sometimes fear, because it's a survival instinct, has a tendency to take over the decision-making. But I urge people to stay away from that. Instead of figuring out, how do I cut costs, figure out how do I expand my income? How do I become more valuable? How do I do more good in the world so that I can get paid a lot and do the things I want to do with it and still be smart with saving and all the other stuff?
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
My pleasure, guys.
Yeah, it was great. And I couldn't think of a better parting shot. So we'll wrap it up there before we ruin it. So thanks to everybody who tuned in this week and every week. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to share information with our guest, all the information will be in the show notes. Tune in next week, and until then, we'll see you. Have a good one.